Hey friends, Stephanie here. I am doing a tutorial today on how to tie this knot right here. This is actually a knot from the Ashley Book of Knots, or the ABOK. This is technically called a 2-strand stopper knot and is listed as number 778 in the Ashley Book of Knots. So the ABOK 778 is what we're tying today. This video is thanks to Dave, as he requested, suggested, commissioned that I do this tutorial. So I have a scrap piece of some silver gray paracord, about 1.5 foot. That's plenty length that you'll need for this. I also have a little mini binder clip. It's not really necessary, it just kind of helps me to keep things a little bit more structured and organized as I'm doing that. Then I also have, of course, a trusty marlin spike, and then I'm going to show you how to tie it on just a regular piece here, but then as you can tell, I obviously use it as a stopper knot on my projects, and so I wanted to show you just kind of a quick little way of being able to do that when attached onto like a pre-made lanyard as well. So to jump into that, I like to just kind of take that scrap cord, fold that in half. This is kind of where I use the binder clip when I'm actually making that top loop or making a first knot. I kind of just like to clip that in there to hold that together, so just kind of my preference. So I clip that piece just in there to have that secured, and then to tie that stopper knot, I'm going to kind of make a loop on the right hand side so that cord goes over the top of that strand where it started. And I kind of hold that at that cross section there, and I feed that other cord through the back side of that loop created. Kind of pull that through so it doesn't get weird and confusing. And then from there it goes down, around, and through the back of the other side. So really at this point, if I were to tighten this up, this is actually just a snake knot. But if you kind of spread that open a little bit and look at it from kind of the bottom, or yeah, I guess probably more the bottom than it is the top, you can kind of see that figure 8 that has been created because of those 2 loops. So you actually take that strand on the right, and where these 2 cords cross, you kind of have an X right here. So you're going over that cord on that side there, and you take that end and run it up and through that side with the cross there. And the other side, you do the same exact thing. So this cord comes out on the left, you have this little X right here, so we're going to go up and through that X on the other side. Tightening with this can be a little bit tricky. I noticed just doing it not as a stopper knot, it seems like one side looks a little bit more uniform than the other. But I'll kind of show you when we put it onto another lanyard where, yeah, it still looks slightly less uniform on one side, but just kind of a way to make that a little better. So I kind of pull some of the slack out, just pulling down on one side here, while kind of pushing down or pulling on the other side just to try to take some of that slack out. Now where the tightening gets a little bit tricky is that it's it's kind of hard to follow where these cords go. So with this strand here, so there are times I actually tighten the wrong side of it and have to figure out where is the other side of the knot so I could tighten it evenly. So I kind of pull a little bit and see that that left strand is what's coming through. So that's the strand I'm going to start tightening there. So get that spike in there, just put a little, kind of hold on to that side that I'm tightening, especially when it's the one that's from that loop that you're creating. Kind of just pull that through, and then you can kind of see this goes under this top one and under this top one as well, and it comes out over here. So I go underneath that. I'm kind of pushing down on that side there and securing where that cord is pulling from. And then I just follow that cord, and that's the one that actually comes up and through the end of that knot. So just pulling that excess out there. Now you can kind of see where I don't really need that anymore. You can see this side is just a little less, it's not really pulled taut like the other one is. So that's where you're going to figure out where that knot or that side of the rope comes through. So it's actually going to be right here. You can kind of tell that that side of the knot is a little looser. So again, I'm kind of holding right at that base of the loop there, so I'm not pulling too much of that slack of that loop back through. And then I'm following that around. So again, it goes underneath this top one, it goes underneath this top one as well. And I'm pushing down on that side that we tightened earlier, pulling that slack through, following that around, and that's the one that comes up through that knot again. So again, pulling that out as well. And then just between kind of pulling on that loop created and pulling on the bottom strands there to tighten that up. I often would probably just go through this again. Most knots that I tie, I will do 2, 3, and sometimes even 4 rounds of tightening. And then what I also find helpful is I actually will get out like a cutting board, or sometimes even a wooden spoon if it's very small specific stuff that I'm trying to tighten up. But I'll actually kind of hammer on it on a hard surface, or like kind of roll it out with a cutting board, or I don't have a rolling pin, so I have to improvise a little bit. So yeah, if I did an extra round of tightening, sometimes that's where it gets a little tricky also, because now it's a little tighter, so you can't see always where all of that slack is coming from. So again, this one goes underneath those 2 top cords, and it comes over here. So I'm kind of pulling with my right as I'm trying to secure and push with my left. And pulling that slack through. I typically stop tightening knots when it's very, very hard to get any more slack out of it, or if once it just looks more uniform and really put together. But the more you tie it, the more you'll get familiar with that design and where those cords fall. So that's kind of another reason why when I do a certain project, I often will repeat the same project multiple times. I have a notebook where I keep all of my different notes, and sometimes I draw little diagrams, or I make notes of how much cord I use, what colors, how much slack I had afterwards, so that way I can cut those cords shorter and reduce the amount of waste that I have. So it does have a a uniform feel to it, but sometimes I just get a little picky because it's like separates maybe on one side and not so much on the other. So sometimes I just really play with that tightening factor. I even have some carabiners that are mounted to the wall, bolted into the wall. So sometimes I'll actually clip this onto the carabiner and I'll pull my weight on that carabiner to really just make things super, super tight and super solid. So that's what the 2-strand stopper knot ABOK 778 looks like. So on the keychains, when I do these little knotted keychains, I've got a series of different knots going all the way down, but that last knot I do before the stopper knot has 2 cords. So I actually have 4 strands that come out of the bottom of that, and I finish it off with only doing the 2-strand around the other 2 strands. So what that would kind of look like, this isn't the same sequence of knots as you might be able to tell, but this is a 2-strand Matthew Walker knot, and this one is a diamond knot. And this is burnt orange, if you want to know that. And then this color is called Spy. So when I'm making that stopper knot onto the lanyard, I'm taking the 2 cords that I do not want in this project or in that knot, kind of fold those down. For this purpose, I'll just kind of try to secure them to the lanyard itself to keep those out of the way. Yeah, so I keep them out of the way for the time being. And then I do the same thing when creating that knot, and then I'll show you how to string those through. So these are some scrap pieces, so they are a little bit bent and don't like to perform as well as fresh cut cord, but trust me, I have plenty of scrap. So again, kind of make that, it's almost like a 9 shape on the right hand side. The left hand cord is going through the back, up through that loop that you're creating. Kind of pull that slack through so it looks a little cleaner, a little less confusing. And then we're going down around that cord and then up through the back side of that loop again. And I just kind of pull it a little tight, but not too tight, because you still have to get a couple cords through there and you want to still see what you're doing. So again, we kind of have this little figure 8 kind of snake knot looking thing here. And then that cord on the right is going to go through that loop on the left, but it's going to go underneath this kind of X pattern that we have here. So down around the back, up through that crisscross. And same with the other side. Left side's going down through that loop on the right, but making sure you kind of get through both that X right there, those 2 strands. And again, trying to pull out some more of that slack. Feeding through the other 2 cords sometimes I do it through, like, you're feeding it through each side of the knot itself, but sometimes I get it through one side and I feel like it just behaves a little bit differently, so then I just don't like it and I take it through the other side of the loop instead. So I kind of try to pay attention to where naturally that spy color is coming out and kind of where that wants to go. So it really just kind of wants to hang out a little bit more toward, let me get this out of the way a bit. It kind of naturally wants to go this way. So I'm going to pair it up next to this strand, but I'm just going through the center of that knot. So you can, I don't know if you can see kind of down in there, but that spy is peeping out through that side. So I'm gonna just poke it through the whole entire center of that knot, following that orange cord on the right. And then the other side, it's the same exact way. We're not going to put it on that side because then it would be a little uneven. And this orange one has a perfect place for it. And then you just kind of start that tightening process all over. Small movements when tightening are always a little bit easier. Because like right now I'm pulling on those excess strands, but I have almost all of that slack out. So that's where I need to start tightening up the actual knot itself and the structure of that. So that orange strand right here is what I'm going to tighten up first. That's coming out of the top part of the knot. So I'm kind of pushing all of that other part of the orange knot down as I'm pulling this up, turning and following that. So it's going under these two top strands and over here to the right. Again, holding that kind of secure and pushing that piece of cord down while I'm kind of with my thumb on those over cords there, pulling some of that excess through. Turning that and following that again, it goes underneath those top two strands and pulling that excess. And again, this is where it gets a little tricky because it's like, okay, I see where it's loose, but where do I start and follow that? So I can kind of tell right here, this piece is pretty loose. So I'm following that back to see where did that start. And it looks a little tricky sometimes because it looks like this cord is actually this one here. And so that's sometimes how I end up tightening the same side more than once and having to figure out where the other side is. But while you're kind of tightening it, you can actually see that it's coming down from this part here. So we'll pull on that. Follow that around. So I definitely could use another round of tightening. Also, as I'm working on that, I'm also pulling on those core strands that are just going through the center to try to keep that knot as pushed up as possible on that lanyard. So I think I'm going to try tightening this one side again here. That's where it trips me up because I think sometimes that it's this cord that's coming out from the bottom here, but it's actually just one over. And I honestly get pretty aggressive when I'm tightening, so I will actually hold on to that, hold on to the, I push down on that loop that's coming out of the main part, put my thumb on those two crossover pieces, put my thumb on this, and I'll put my whole marlin spike on the ground while or on the table. I'm actually holding on to that slack piece that we'd be pulling, so that way I can have really good tension on everything, and I push this down the marlin spike. So that way I can really tighten up this excess part, and then I can pull that extra piece through. So I know since I let go of that one, if I trace that back, that cord started right there. So that's not the one I'm going to tighten next. So I kind of just follow that back around and see what I mean? It's a little tricky sometimes. I'm trying to debate which one I need to pull on. But worst case scenario, you get one side real tight and you're eventually going to figure out which one is loose. So just be patient and keep going. And then keep pulling on those center cords if you're doing it around another piece to make sure that that stays up there nice and tight. Because I don't like, if you were to have a lanyard and somebody's pulling on it, I don't want those knots to separate. So I over tighten everything. So I'm also going to show you how I would kind of burn and cut all of this off, just to make that surface really, really smooth. So hold on one sec. Okay, so I forgot when I started the video that I wanted to show you how to finish that off. So I had to go grab my knife or my, what are these? Scissors. Scissors and my lighter. So I kind of I usually cut about 2 cords at a time. I'm usually getting where they naturally kind of split a little bit here. And I cut pretty close to the end of the knot, but it's probably about, I don't know, what would that be, about 1/4 inch maybe? Kind of close, but you don't want to cut it too close because then when it melts, it's actually going to, that area is going to get smaller. And so I want to cut it about 1/4 inch or so from the base of that knot. Could probably use some sharper scissors for a cleaner cut, but this works. And then I do the same to the other side, to the base. Like I said, about 1/4 inch. And then with burning, I honestly will kind of rotate and burn at the same time. I'm trying to get all 4 of those cords to be pretty well uniformly melted down. And I do it for quite a while. I definitely have gone through a fair share of lighters this year, more than other years. But that color starts to turn real dark. Sometimes it'll bubble up a little bit. Usually when it starts to catch fire again, it's probably when it's about done. But I use those scissors to kind of push some of that into where that knot might have a little bit of a gap. I'm pushing and obviously sliding, so then that way that surface is really flat there. That one kind of turned out to be a pretty big burn. Overall a little dark, but that's pretty much how that would turn out. And then it's very flat on the bottom there. So that burn process does take some practice as well. I don't like getting it like where it's not burnt enough, because then you still kind of see a fair amount of the actual structure of the inside of the knot where it's just barely burned. So if you just kind of do it like that and tighten, it's still effective, but I feel like there's a pretty good chance you could eventually just kind of get that separated from the sheath again, and it just doesn't look like it's burnt very well. So again, I'm kind of analytical on that, but that's pretty much all there is to it. Right? Piece of cake. So yeah, that's what those knots would look like by itself on the bottom of a very short lantern and on a larger one. The Ashley Book of Knots, ABOK 778. So I hope this has been helpful, and you have an awesome, awesome day. Bye, guys.